The latest in my series, The Underrated. I think this science fiction movie from great director Terry Gilliam is very underrated. It's his The Zero Theorem from 2013. Let me tell you why I think this movie is at least respectable and interesting, if not actually pretty good, coming up next. I actually highly recommend the Zero Theorem or trying it for those who are philosophy students, those who are interested in questions of being, ontology, epistemology, all these giant philosophical questions, coupled with a science fiction setting and some contemporary social problems come up in this movie. I just really like it a lot, but I'm saying it's underrated because on Letterboxd.com, for example, and all over the internet, this movie is very, very lowly rated. Letterboxd only has it right now as a 3.0 out of 5. That's actually very low for them. A better rating would be like 3.6, 3.7. That could be respectable. But here, a lot of people are dissing this movie or saying it's mediocre. I just don't think that's correct. Now, to give a very basic description of this movie, I think actually some of the descriptions are wrong. It's a computer programmer, sort of a person played by Christoph Waltz. He is in a science fictional world. He lives in an abandoned church, sort of semi-cathedral, and he goes in and he goes to work, but he doesn't want to work there anymore. He wants to work from home, and he's working for a giant corporation which is trying to solve a universal equation that is, in one sense, nonsensical, but it also reminds me of the sort of equations, crafty equations, elaborate equations created by Google and Apple in order to solve human problems, like basic human desire problems. Anyway, he goes home and he meets a number of people who come to his house. I actually don't want to say any more than that, but this is a very thoughtful movie for introverts in particular, of which I am one. The main character actually is confronted with a gigantic problem that he's going to die and turn into nothing. He has a dream of a black hole swallowing him up, and the question of what if there is nothing beyond this life and this world comes up in this movie. This main character, though, hopes for a call, a literal phone call from someone, he doesn't know who will give him the answers to his life's questions, maybe give him the meaning of his life. He's looking for his call, or calling, and calling is a very popular word to use around business settings. What is your calling? What are your life's purposes supposed to be? Well, this character is looking for that, hoping there's something beyond the black hole of nothingness. He works really hard from home, but the problem is he's surveilled by his corporation and hounded when he's not productive enough. He also realizes, and I think this is one of the great things about this movie, or the great points of this movie, that it actually sucks to work from home, or for a lot of people it does, even though it seems like a good idea. You don't have to go into the workplace if you're a severe introvert like the main character. You don't have to see people on a day-to-day basis and interact with them. You just work from home. But it turns out when you work from home, your work becomes your home, and vice versa. So you never get away from your work. That's the dilemma depicted in this movie for the main character. I really love the home in this movie. I think it's one of the great movie houses I've ever seen. This abandoned church, this small-looking cathedral. Interestingly, it's right next to a porn shop, and the altar is the place where the main character works, has his therapy sessions, and then behind him is a crucifix with a camera. The idea of the all-seeing God, of the religion of the church, presumably Christianity, being replaced by the all-seeing God of the surveillance state, and here the corporation always watching this main character, I think is a great Orwellian touch. I think there are a number of things that weird people out about this movie, and one of maybe it's scenario, and maybe it's also, I actually think this, that it's confronting people with the ultimate despair, that your life is meaningless, and there's nothing in the universe, and you are a slave to something and somebody. There are Matrix tones in this movie that you were a slave to somebody, as the character Morpheus says in The Matrix, but there's no out or escape from the world as there is in The Matrix, where it's a computer simulation. Here, it's the real world. And so how can you get out of being a slave or a servant to the corporation, the man, or the system? Well, you can't, other than escaping into fantasies. Virtual fantasies, like with a VR set, as you see depicted in this movie, with a tropical island scenario and a babe within that scenario, a virtual babe within that scenario. This is a typical fantasy, and it's nice to escape into art or video games or film, as this movie is depicting, but it's just an escape. That black hole is always going to swallow you up. I think that despair that looms over this movie, and it comes from the book of Ecclesiastes, referenced throughout this movie from the Bible. What's the purpose of life? Is it just to eat and drink and then die? Is it just to work, sleep, eat, drink, die? That is one thing this movie confronts all viewers with. I hesitate to read people's minds because I think that's wrong to do, but I do wonder if people see or confronted by the despair of this film, which I think is a real kind of despair that we all have to think about pretty hard in our lives. What's the purpose of our life? Confronts us with that and then makes us uneasy. I wonder if that's why this movie is so low rated. But certainly there are a number of very weird choices in this movie, from how Matt Damon is used as a symbol or figurehead or corporate executive in this movie. The corporation always watching, is in all environments watching this main character. I also think the main character is hard to appreciate. He is hard to identify with. For one thing, he mumbles a lot. Christoph Waltz's performance, kind of hard to even hear what he's saying. But then he also uses the word we to talk about himself, and that is automatically weird because he should be using the word I. The real question is, why does he use the word we? And he's using the word we because that's the word used in the book of Ecclesiastes. He is named after the writer of Ecclesiastes, in English translations called the preacher, but Kohen Leth is the name of this character or author of the book. I know attributed to Solomon, but if you look at the real Hebrew word, I think that's the Hebrew word. That's the name of the main character. He uses this word we, a la the royal we, perhaps, but also maybe to signify his sort of schizophrenia. Now, I'm not clinically diagnosing him, but when you say we, are you saying you have more than one self inside you? I don't know, maybe. The schizoid man idea coming out from the 1960s to the present day, that we're all fragmented, we're polyvocal, we have split selves, we're one sort of person at home, another sort of person in school, another sort of person in church, another at work. I think that's coming up in this movie. The main character is hard to relate to because he is maybe a little quacky in that sense, but he's trying to be representative of a cultural phenomenon, this sort of schizoid type, as it were. And then also maybe he's representing a number of people and their problems. That is, he's speaking for we. When he says we, he's speaking for all of us. And you'll note he's playing a Minecraft-like game. This movie comes out right as Minecraft becomes popular, but his experience of this game, designed by this corporation, is to solve a massive equation, a la capitalism or business or economics can solve all of our problems. That is literalized in this movie by the corporation trying to find a literal equation to solve a bunch of problems. Now, what I said earlier in this video is I find this to be like what's going on in the real world, and probably a wild exaggeration of what's going on in the real world. One, with the work from home phenomenon, where we are monitored from home if we work from home. Our internet is monitored. Even the use of our mouse on our computers and laptops are monitored. And people are even purchasing devices to wiggle their mice in order to trick their employers or say to their employers, hey, I'm working, when they're really not. This character is monitored 24/7 at home, and he's notified when he's not productive enough, which I think is very disturbing. Second of all, that corporations, and gigantic ones, are trying to create equations that are going to give us a number of things, solve a number of our problems, give us eternal happiness or a lot of happiness through these equations. For example, algorithms that are going to make choices for us, that are trying to tell us what our desires are, and we're being quantified in every single way through equations and numbers. And our desires, our wants, our needs, our likes, our personality, all of that is being quantified for us. So this idea of solving an equation in the movie, and a corporation trying to do that, I think it's quite like what's going on today, where everything's being quantified and everything's being put in terms of numbers and equations in a digital virtual world. Whether or not that's good or bad or indifferent, that's for you to decide. But the movie, I think, is pretty harsh on the science fictional future, which is hedonistic. There's a lot of bombast and stimulation in the world of this character, which I think the visualization of this world is absolutely wonderful. Whenever this character roams around outside, I love to look around at what director Terry Gilliam came up with as far as this futuristic world. But then again, it's very haunting because it's a hedonistic world, the backdrop of which, or surrounding it, is the black hole of nothingness that this character dreams of. And so it's false hedonism surrounded by pure materialism, I think, that has this haunting of nothingness. And then you have the church, which has been vacated as this sort of religious, sacred, or spiritual sense, looming but empty. And this movie, I think, is very despairing in that way. But I think what this movie is asking us to question, what is the purpose of our lives? Why are we doing what are we doing? Why is the main character waiting on a phone call? What is his real hope? There are 1,000 questions that come up here that are rooted in the book of Ecclesiastes and sort of, Old Testament Hebrew despair that's in Christian Bibles still, for example. So I think this is a really interesting movie that has an ecclesiastical vision. She's telling us this through the main character and just his name. Now, do you agree with that or not? Let us know in the comments. Tell me what you think of this movie. And please subscribe to this channel for more great content and stimulating thought. Thanks. Have a great day.